They mocked her, laughed at her, ignored her, but what they didn't know was she owned everything they thought they controlled. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about rising from the shadows, rewriting the rules, and proving that true power doesn't shout. It watches, waits, and then changes everything. In the heart of Chicago's financial district stood Zenith Tower, home of Ardent and Lane, a powerhouse investment firm revered for its aggressive growth and polished reputation. Among the throngs of executives who wore ambition like perfume, a woman named Marcia Bellamy moved unnoticed. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, pushing her supply cart through the pristine hallways. Her uniform, always crisp, seemed to shield her from the coldness of the corporate world. To most, Marcia was just the cleaning lady. She didn't belong to their strategy meetings, their cigar lounges, or their six-figure dinners. But she knew every corner of that building, physically and politically. For the last 7 years, she'd watched boardroom decisions, heard hallway whispers, and memorized names and secrets most never imagined she understood. The five men who truly ran Ardent and Lane, CEO Garrett Thorne, VP Silas Crowley, HR Director Dean Mercer, IT Head Owen Black, and Finance Chief Randall Phelps, treated her like office furniture. Their laughter, laced with mockery, often echoed as Marcia cleaned their spaces. "You think she knows how to spell merger?" Garrett once joked, drawing snickers. But Marcia kept moving, silent and dangerously aware. Though she never responded, Marcia heard everything. The cruel banter wasn't new. It was a routine. They mocked her age, her accent, her silence. Dean, who oversaw employee culture, once whispered loudly enough for her to hear. Imagine her in a strategy session. She'd mistake EBITDA for a typo. What they didn't realize was that Marcia had once led strategy sessions. Years ago, she held executive titles at firms in London and New York, backed by dual degrees from Columbia and LSE. But a corporate betrayal and a tragic family loss drove her to abandon it all. She chose a quieter life, not because she lacked options, but because she had a mission. By day, she cleaned. By night, she consulted anonymously for nonprofits tackling workplace racism and class bias. And through a private trust left by her late husband, she owned silent shares in several corporations, including a growing stake in Ardent and Lane. She watched Garrett Thorne's empire grow bloated with arrogance. She saw how promotions favored loyalty over merit. She tracked every memo Dean buried, every complaint Owen deleted, and every budget Randall manipulated. They thought she was invisible. But in truth, Marcia was everywhere, and she was almost ready. The breaking point came one Thursday evening. Marcia was scrubbing the edge of the executive boardroom when she overheard Garrett boasting to his team. "Once the merger is through, we'll trim the fat, starting with low-tier staff. Cleaning crew's the first to go." Someone laughed. "Don't worry, Marcia's probably too busy counting crumbs to understand you." That night, Marcia sat in her modest apartment, surrounded by legal pads and digital spreadsheets. Her hands, once rough from bleach, now trembled, not with fear, but with resolve. For too long, she documented every unethical act, hidden layoffs, falsified compliance reports, the silencing of whistleblowers. She pulled out a locked metal file. Inside were share certificates, recently transferred into her name. With the last transaction completed just weeks ago, Marcia Bellamy was now the majority shareholder of Ardent and Lane. She didn't want revenge. She wanted justice. For the janitors who cried in silence, for the interns berated in corridors, for the forgotten who made the building run. And she wasn't going to make a scene. She would let them walk into the trap. The annual shareholder summit loomed. Garrett and his inner circle were jubilant. "No threats on the proxy ballot," Randall declared. "Smooth sailing." They hadn't even noticed the name shift on the latest shareholder list. Why would they? Marcia Bellamy was just the woman who mopped their floors. As the building buzzed with pre-summit energy, Marcia kept her routine exact, wiping windows, replacing bins, nodding to receptionists. But something was different. Her steps were firmer, her silence sharper. She'd filed whistleblower reports under a pseudonym. She'd submitted her shareholder motion in perfect accordance with company bylaws. And most critically, she'd looped in the right people: external investigators, diversity advocates, and a journalist with impeccable timing. The night before the summit, she walked past Garrett's glass office. He barely glanced at her. See you at the circus tomorrow, he muttered to his team. Let's remind these pencil pushers who owns the room. If only he knew. The summit opened with a grand buffet and practiced smiles. Garrett took the stage like a rock star, flanked by Silas and Dean. Another record year, he boomed. Ardent and Lane leads the future. The room applauded until a soft voice interrupted. Point of order. Heads turned. There, in her uniform, stood Marcia, holding a folder embossed with the company seal. Dean chuckled nervously. Ma'am, this area is restricted. No, Dean, she said, voice calm. As majority shareholder, I believe I have the floor. A hush fell. Garrett's jaw twitched. This is absurd. Marcia stepped forward, opening the folder. Contained herein is evidence of discrimination, financial manipulation, and systemic abuse perpetrated by your leadership team. I move to terminate all 5 executives effective immediately and initiate a full ethics audit. The board members, stunned, looked between Garrett and Marcia. One by one, their faces changed, from skepticism to concern. The woman they'd ignored now held their fate. The boardroom fell into stunned silence. Garrett's confident smile had vanished, replaced by a twitch of disbelief. Silas leaned forward, whispering urgently into his phone, likely calling legal. Dean's hands trembled over his tablet, swiping through the shareholder list like a man realizing he had been asleep at the wheel. Marcia stood firm, her uniform now a symbol, not of service but of patience forged into power. She handed the packet to the general counsel. Pages 4 through 17 outline the misuse of severance funds. Page 23 includes internal emails mocking diversity hires. And page 31, she paused, details how Randall funneled expense reimbursements into a private fund. Randall's face drained of color. That's taken out of context. I included the context, Marcia replied. A murmur moved through the investors seated around the long table. A motion was raised to temporarily suspend the executive board pending review. The room, once ruled by arrogance and intimidation, now felt like a courtroom, one where the judge wore a janitor's badge. Garrett slammed his palm on the table. You think this is justice? You think they'll side with you? Marcia didn't flinch. No, Garrett, I know they will, because I have the truth and the shares. The interim board members moved swiftly. Ardent and Lane's bylaws allowed for emergency votes when shareholder majority motions were raised with supporting evidence. A mediator from the firm's legal counsel stood to oversee. We will proceed with the vote as motioned. All shareholders present, please indicate whether you support the immediate removal of the current executive leadership. Garrett laughed bitterly. This is a circus. But when the hands started rising, first 1, then 3, then 7, his face lost its composure. The weight of years of unchallenged rule slipped through his fingers. Owen Black, the IT director, stood up mid-vote and whispered to Garrett, she has it all, emails, cameras, even the buried audit we thought was gone. How? Garrett muttered. She's not just a cleaner, Owen said quietly. She's been building this case for years. The final count was read aloud, unanimous. Garrett Thorne, Silas Crowley, Dean Mercer, Randall Phelps, and Owen Black were officially removed from their positions, effective immediately. Security was called. As Garrett was escorted out, he turned to Marcia one last time. You'll regret this. Marcia met his glare with a calm smile. Only people who build empires on silence regret the sound of truth. News of the boardroom takeover spread like wildfire. That evening, Marcia's name trended across corporate news outlets. The janitor who owned the company, read one headline. The ghost of Zenith Tower reveals herself, declared another. Inside Ardent and Lane, reactions varied. Some employees wept with relief, others panicked, unsure what came next. But the cleaning crew? They held their heads higher that day. A young intern named Jasmine, who had once been scolded by Silas for asking a question during a meeting, found Marcia in the break room. You really own this place? I own a piece of it, Marcia said gently. But what matters now is what we all do with it. She returned to her small office, formerly the janitor's supply closet, and sat at her desk. It was temporary, but symbolic. She didn't take the executive floor. Not yet. That night, she met with advocacy groups, compliance auditors, and labor representatives. Her first initiative? Equal pay restructuring, and an ethics task force. Justice had been served, but healing needed to begin. And Marcia wasn't done. The following week, Marcia launched a confidential platform for employees to report past abuses. Within 24 hours, over 200 entries flooded in, detailing harassment, manipulation, discrimination, and financial misconduct spanning years. One former employee, a single father named Darian, had been fired after raising concerns about a racial slur used by his supervisor. HR had buried it. Now, Marcia tracked down his case and personally called him. "You were right," she said, "and I'm making it right." Simultaneously, Marcia began overhauling the recruitment process, eliminating Ivy League-only filters and removing culture fit as a hiring metric, a vague excuse often used to exclude minorities. Meanwhile, the remaining leadership tried to adjust to the new climate. Some did so willingly, others resisted quietly. But the balance had shifted. In a firm once ruled by ego, fear, and exclusivity, a new force had emerged: integrity. And Marcia? She was everywhere again. But this time they all saw her. On a rainy Friday morning, the new board convened, this time with representatives from every department, including 2 from the maintenance and support staff. Marcia, now interim chair, wore a charcoal blazer, but still carried her old ID badge clipped to her hip. It was a message. She hadn't forgotten where she came from. "Power doesn't come from your title," she told the room. "It comes from how you treat the people who have none." One of the board members, a senior accountant, raised his hand. "You never wanted this power, did you?" Marcia smiled. "I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect to mean something again." Later that afternoon, she stood by the glass walls of the top floor, the same view Garrett once claimed as his throne. But unlike him, she wasn't looking down. She was looking out, toward new possibilities. And the city, for the first time in a long time, felt like it was finally waking up. Despite the overwhelming support Marcia received from most employees, not everyone was pleased with the new order. A few senior managers who had managed to avoid scrutiny during the executive purge began whispering among themselves, sowing doubt about Marcia's lack of traditional leadership. "She's turning this place into a charity," one scoffed. Another added, "There's no way she can balance compassion with profits." Marcia anticipated this. In her second week of leadership, she scheduled one-on-one sessions with every department head. No excuses. She didn't confront them with accusations, but with questions. What do you think this company should stand for? What kind of legacy are you leaving for the next generation? By the time she finished, even her most skeptical critics found themselves reconsidering. Because Marcia wasn't just changing policy, she was changing the culture. At the end of that week, the company's stock rose, not because of a new merger or acquisition, but because media coverage of the firm's radical transformation attracted ethical investors and socially conscious partners. The message was clear: doing good wasn't bad for business, and Marcia wasn't just surviving in the boardroom anymore, she was leading it. One Monday morning, Marcia received an unexpected message, an email from Owen Black, the former IT head. He requested a meeting. She hesitated. He had been one of the cruelest voices in the old regime, but something in his tone, humble, raw, made her agree. They met in a neutral cafe, far from the glass towers. Owen looked smaller without his tailored suits and smug aura. His voice shook as he spoke. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I was a coward. I saw what was happening. I joined the laughs. I never thought you were really listening." Marcia didn't respond immediately. She let the silence sit. "You didn't think I was worth hearing," she finally said, "but I was always watching." Owen nodded. "I know, I've lost everything, but if there's anything I can do to help now, I'd like to." She studied him. "Help rebuild, but not for me, for those you once ignored." He nodded slowly. Marcia didn't believe in grudges. She believed in consequences, but also in growth. And if someone was willing to walk back from darkness, she'd give them a path. She had walked one herself. Marcia's next act wasn't for headlines or corporate strategy. It was personal. She called a private meeting in the break room where the cleaning crew took their midnight breaks. The staff gathered nervously, unsure what to expect. Marcia arrived, not in a suit but in her uniform, the same one she wore when she was invisible. The room fell silent. "I never forgot who stood beside me all those years," she began, her voice warm but steady. "You were my family when no one else saw me, And now that I have a seat at the top, so do all of you. Tears welled in a few eyes. One woman named Rosa, who had worked at Ardent and Lane for 18 years, covered her mouth in disbelief. Marcia continued, every one of you will receive a raise, health benefits, and starting next month, you'll have a representative in company policy meetings. No more decisions made without your voice. They clapped, some quietly, some erupting with joy. But above all, they believed her, because she had lived their life. She hadn't climbed up the ladder and pulled it away, Simon. She was planting new ones beside her. Marcia was invited to speak at a National Business Ethics Summit. She almost declined. Public attention wasn't her goal, but the organizers insisted her story had already inspired a wave of employee rights movements across multiple industries. Standing on the stage under bright lights, she looked out at a crowd of CEOs, lawyers, and HR leaders. I used to clean the floors of people who thought I had no right to speak, she began. But silence is not weakness, it's strategy. And when the time is right, it becomes truth. She spoke of hidden power, of humility, and of systems built to exclude, of how leadership wasn't about domination, but service, of how the most transformative change doesn't begin in corner offices, but in break rooms, cleaning closets, and lunch lines. The standing ovation was thunderous, but more importantly, it was genuine. That night, Marcia received over 100 emails from leaders promising to re-examine their practices. The seed she had planted in one boardroom was now growing across an entire industry. 1 month later, Marcia received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten in neat cursive. It was from Delaney Thorne, Garrett's daughter, the same Garrett she had removed, the same man who once mocked her for simply existing in the room. Dear Ms. Bellamy, it began, I know you don't owe me anything, but I wanted you to know my father changed after what happened. He didn't say much, but he started volunteering, helping at shelters, and he spoke of you often. Marcia read the letter twice. It wasn't redemption, but it was a crack in the wall, a sign that even those who fall far can find a path back to grace. She tucked the letter into her desk drawer, beside the first offer letter she'd written for a new hire from the maintenance team. Marcia wasn't interested in legacy. She was interested in change. And every day she showed up, not as the ghost of Zenith Tower, but as its guiding light. Under Marcia's leadership, Ardent and Lane began implementing a revolutionary system, the human impact audit. It wasn't about just numbers, profits, or compliance. It evaluated how every department's decisions affected people. The initiative was met with skepticism at first, especially from longtime managers. How do you quantify kindness? One asked mockingly. You don't, Marcia replied. You honor it. The audit team, composed of employees from all levels, reviewed hiring records, pay equity, exit interviews, and anonymous feedback. The results revealed uncomfortable truths, but also hidden heroes, frontline workers who mentored others, middle managers who advocated quietly, and interns who spoke up despite fear. Rather than punishment, Marcia emphasized restorative justice. Offenders were required to attend leadership re-education programs. Some chose to resign, others transformed. The company's turnover rate dropped by 40%. Productivity surged. But most importantly, Ardent and Lane began earning something rarer than revenue: trust. And every change was signed off by the woman who once scrubbed floors. Late one evening, Marcia stood on the rooftop of Zenith Tower, the city lights twinkling below. She was joined by Jasmine, the young intern she had once comforted in the break room. I want to be like you, Jasmine said quietly. Marcia smiled. No, Jasmine. Be better than me. Learn from me, but lead in your own way. Jasmine hesitated. Were you ever scared? All the time, Marcia replied. But I learned fear can either paralyze you or sharpen your focus. I chose the latter. They stood in silence for a moment, wind brushing through their hair. Do you miss cleaning? Jasmine asked softly. Marcia chuckled. Sometimes. There's peace in clearing messes, especially the quiet ones. But these days I clean something bigger. I clean systems. That night, Marcia handed Jasmine a handwritten note. It was a recommendation letter, sealed with her personal signature. Not for a promotion, but for a scholarship fund Marcia had founded in memory of the unseen workers who made every building run. Stories of Ardent and Lane's transformation echoed through industries. Other companies began inviting Marcia to consult, not as a speaker, but as a strategic advisor. She accepted a few, but only the ones truly willing to confront their own ugliness. Meanwhile, employees at her own firm began building new traditions, monthly bridge talks, where janitors, analysts, security guards, and directors sat in the same circle and shared their experiences. One such session featured a former cafeteria worker named Tasha, who revealed that she'd been homeless for 6 months while employed. The room fell silent. Marcia stood up and said, "We can't call ourselves a success if the people feeding us go hungry." From that day, a housing assistance program was created, funded not by budget cuts, but by executive salary adjustments. And no one protested. In fact, several leaders voluntarily contributed more. Marcia didn't just rewrite policies, she rewrote priorities. 1 year after the boardroom reckoning, Marcia received a request from the Board of Ethics at her old firm, the one she'd left decades ago. They asked her to deliver a keynote speech titled, "Legacy, Who Are You When No One's Looking?" In that room were many of the same people who had once dismissed her, overlooked her, or doubted her. She began the speech with a question. Raise your hand if you have ever ignored someone simply because you thought they couldn't affect your world. Most hands stayed down. She smiled. Then you're lying, because once you all ignored me. She didn't name names, she didn't shame. She shared her story with grace, clarity, and undeniable strength. And by the end, even her former rivals stood to applaud. Afterward, a junior assistant approached her, whispering, "Thank you. I needed to see someone like me up there." Marcia placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then make sure you're never the one who needs someone else's permission to rise." On the anniversary of the vote, the employees of Arden and Lane unveiled a sculpture in the lobby. It wasn't of a suit-wearing CEO or a marble globe. It was a bronze cleaning cart. At its base, a plaque read, "To those who were never seen yet always carried the weight, to the quiet ones who listened, to the bold ones who rose, this is for you." Marcia stood quietly at the back of the crowd, mist in her eyes. She didn't give a speech. She didn't need to. Her legacy was not in her titles, not in the votes she'd won, or the system she'd changed, but in every person who now walked into Arden and Lane seen, heard, and respected. And every night as she turned off her office light, she'd pass the bronze cart and smile. Because it wasn't just a symbol, it was where everything had begun. Never underestimate someone based on the job they do. Patience, dignity, and justice can grow quietly. And when the time is right, they can transform an entire system. True power doesn't need to prove itself. It creates change.